On the afternoon of June 18, 1976, at approximately 2:15 p.m., a 29-year-old telephone operator named Larisa Borodina accepted an invitation to coffee that would erase her from official Soviet records. Larisa worked at Moscow's Central Telegraph Office on Tverskaya Street, a massive concrete and glass structure where she spent 8 hours each day routing international calls through antiquated switchboards. She had held the position for 6 years. Her supervisor's evaluations, later retrieved from employment archives, consistently rated her performance as satisfactory. She arrived punctually, took her allocated lunch break at exactly noon, and rarely called in sick. By all documented measures, she was unremarkable. She lived in a communalka on Malaya Bronaya Street, sharing the apartment with 3 other families. Her room measured approximately 12 square meters. A narrow bed occupied one wall, a wardrobe the other, and a small desk sat beneath the single window overlooking the courtyard. The kitchen and bathroom facilities were communal, governed by an informal schedule that had evolved over years of cohabitation. Neighbors interviewed after her disappearance described her as quiet, polite, someone who kept to herself but never caused problems. Her routine varied little. Work 5 days weekly, shopping at the gastronome on Saturday mornings, occasional visits to her mother in Tver on Sunday afternoons. She attended the cinema perhaps twice monthly with her friend Marina, a typist from the Ministry of Light Industry. The surveillance reports, compiled in subsequent months, would paint a portrait of profound ordinariness, a woman whose life followed prescribed channels with minimal deviation. June 18th began like any Friday. She left for work at 7:30 a.m., returned at 4:45 p.m., and stopped at the bakery near Pushkin Square to purchase bread for the weekend. The weather was warm, the streets crowded with Muscovites enjoying the summer afternoon. According to witness statements obtained during later KGB interviews, she was standing near the Pushkin monument, examining items in her shopping bag, when a man approached. Philippe Mercier was 34 years old. He worked as a correspondent for Le Figaro and had been stationed in Moscow for 18 months. His movements were documented by the Second Chief Directorate as a matter of standard procedure. All Western journalists received such attention during this period. The file on him, declassified decades later, noted his contacts with various Soviet citizens but flagged nothing particularly suspicious. He spoke competent Russian with a noticeable accent. "Excuse me," he said, gesturing toward the monument. "Could you tell me about Pushkin? I'm trying to improve my understanding of Russian culture." A pedestrian waiting at the nearby trolleybus stop recalled overhearing portions of their conversation. Larisa had smiled, appeared surprised, but not displeased by the attention. She explained basics. Biographical facts about the poet mentioned a favorite poem. The exchange lasted perhaps 7 or 8 minutes. Then Mercier made his proposal. Would she be willing to continue the conversation over coffee? He was finding it difficult to meet ordinary Muscovites, he explained. Official channels provided only curated interactions. He wanted to understand real Soviet life. Larisa hesitated. The witness remembered this detail specifically during her interrogation 2 years afterward. The pause, the uncertainty in Larisa's expression. But it was 1976, the height of détente. American and Soviet spacecraft had docked in orbit the previous summer. Western films occasionally appeared in Moscow cinemas. The systematic paranoia of Stalin's era had softened, replaced by what historians would later term stagnation, a period of reduced overt terror but continued surveillance. She agreed. They walked to a cafe on Gorky Street, a place frequented by office workers and students. Documents indicate they remained there for approximately 1 hour. Their conversation covered innocuous topics: her work at the telegraph office, his impressions of Moscow, Soviet cinema, French literature. A waitress who served them recalled nothing remarkable. 2 customers seated nearby were later identified as informants who filed reports describing the interaction as polite, animated, seemingly innocent. Mercier asked if they might meet again. He was preparing an article about daily life in Moscow and would value her perspective. Larissa, according to the informant reports, expressed interest but suggested they wait a few days. She needed to think about it. They parted at 6:40 p.m. near Mayakovskaya metro station. The second meeting occurred on June the 21st, a Monday afternoon. Larissa had agreed to meet during her lunch break at a different cafe, this one closer to her workplace. The interval between meetings, 3 days, would later be analyzed in security assessments as potentially significant. Had she consulted with anyone? Made inquiries about the propriety of such contact? Surveillance conducted after the first encounter showed she had not. This conversation lasted only 45 minutes due to her work schedule. They discussed Moscow's architecture, the upcoming summer, her family background. She mentioned her mother in Tver, her younger sister, who taught primary school. Mercier described his hometown in Provence, the differences between French and Russian social customs. A patron seated 3 tables away, another informant, whose identity remained classified until the 1990s, characterized the exchange as culturally oriented, politically neutral. When they parted, Mercier asked if he might telephone her to arrange another meeting. Larissa provided her work number. That evening, she returned to her communalka at approximately 6:15 p.m. The concierge, an elderly woman named Klavdia Semyonovna, noted her arrival in the building log, a habit maintained meticulously for 40 years. Larissa appeared in good spirits, carrying her shopping bag and a book she'd purchased at a second-hand store near the cafe. She prepared a simple dinner of kasha and vegetables, ate alone in her room, and read until nearly midnight. The window remained open to let in the June air. Streetlight filtered through the thin curtains. In the courtyard below, someone played a radio softly. What Larissa did not know, could not know, was that her name had already been entered into a file. The first informant report had been submitted within hours of that initial encounter near Pushkin Square. A case number would be assigned within the week. The concierge's log, previously routine bureaucratic documentation, now served a different purpose. The machinery had begun its work. Case file 2847L was opened on June the 21st, 1976, the same day Larissa Borodina met Philippe Mercier for the second time. The file began as 3 typewritten pages summarizing the initial contact, witness observations, and preliminary assessment of potential security risk. By the end of that first week, it had grown to 17 pages. The decision to open formal surveillance came from Major Yuri Konstantinovich Orlov of the 2nd Chief Directorate's Department K, which monitored foreign correspondents and their Soviet contacts. His authorization memo, declassified in 1998, cited repeated voluntary contact with foreign national of possible intelligence affiliation as justification. The language was deliberately vague, bureaucratically flexible. In practice, any Soviet citizen who met a Westerner more than once attracted attention. Orlov assigned the case to Lieutenant Dmitry Pavlovich Sokolov, a 31-year-old officer who had handled similar investigations for 4 years. Sokolov's approach, documented in his operational reports, followed established protocols with methodical precision. First step: activate existing informant networks in the subject's orbit. Klavdia Semyonovna, the concierge at Larissa's Kommunalka, had filed reports to the KGB for 12 years. Her compensation, An extra 40 rubles monthly and occasional assistance with housing bureaucracy was modest but meaningful on a pensioner's income. She maintained detailed logs of resident comings and goings, visitors, suspicious behavior, overheard conversations. The day after case 2847L opened, she received specific instructions. Note every detail of Larissa's schedule, any visitors, any deviation from routine, any telephone calls placed from the communal hallway. Telephone. At the Central Telegraph Office, 3 informants were already embedded among the staff. Their existence was compartmentalized. None knew of the others. One was a senior switchboard supervisor who had recruited in 1968 after her husband's arrest for black market activities provided convenient leverage. Another was a maintenance technician, a true believer who viewed cooperation as patriotic duty. The third remained unidentified, even in later, declassified materials, referenced only as Source Gamma. These informants received their tasking on June 23rd, monitor Borodina's work performance, social interactions, lunch breaks, personal telephone usage, political comments, mood changes. Report weekly, more frequently if circumstances warranted. The surveillance infrastructure available to the Second Chief Directorate in mid-1970s Moscow was extensive, refined through decades of practice. The Directorate employed approximately 50,000 personnel, supplemented by an estimated 500,000 active informants across the Soviet Union. In Moscow alone, several thousand citizens provided regular reports. Neighbors watching neighbors, colleagues monitoring colleagues, the state's eyes distributed throughout daily life. Sokolov's operational plan, filed on June the 24th, outlined surveillance objectives and methods. Physical surveillance teams would track Larissa's movements outside work and home. Her telephone calls would be monitored, both those she placed and those she received. Mail to and from her address would be opened, photographed, resealed. Background investigation would examine her entire documented history. Employment records, educational transcripts, family connections, political reliability assessments, any previous security inquiries. The background check revealed nothing remarkable. Born in Tver in 1947, Larissa Mikhailovna Borodina had grown up in a working-class family. Her father drove trucks for a state transport company until his death from heart failure in 1969. Her mother worked in a textile factory. Neither parent had party membership, but neither had any record of political unreliability. Larissa's educational performance was average. She had completed secondary school and a 1-year technical course in telecommunications before beginning work at the telegraph office in 1970. Her party record was clean. She had joined Komsomol at the required age, allowed her membership to lapse at 28, which was common. No disciplinary actions appeared in her employment files, no associations with dissidents, refuseniks, or known troublemakers. No foreign connections beyond the ordinary, a cousin who had married a man from Latvia, an uncle who had fought in the Great Patriotic War and been captured briefly by Germans before escaping. The file noted her friend Marina Stepanova, the typist, as her only regular social contact outside family. Background checks on Marina showed similar unremarkability. They attended films together, occasionally shopped at Jum department store, spent some Sunday afternoons walking in Gorky Park. Surveillance teams had observed them dozens of times over the years during routine monitoring of public spaces. Nothing suspicious had ever been noted. This ordinariness made Larissa's contact with Mercier more puzzling to her investigators. Recruitment targets typically showed some vulnerability: financial pressure, career frustration, ideological wavering, romantic disappointment. Sokolov's initial assessment found none of these factors. His June 26th report raised the question directly. Subject displays no obvious susceptibility to foreign recruitment. Recommend continued observation to determine Mercier's operational interest. The physical surveillance began in earnest on June 22nd. Two-person teams rotated in 8-hour shifts, following Larissa from her apartment to work, documenting her lunch breaks, tracking her evening movements. The teams used standard techniques developed over decades, changing positions frequently, switching personnel, employing multiple vehicles, blending into crowds. Officers dressed as ordinary citizens, factory workers, office clerks, pensioners. They carried newspapers, shopping bags, whatever. Props suited the environment. Larissa's routine proved utterly predictable. She left for work each morning between 7:25 and 7:35, walked to Mayakovskaya metro station, took the same route daily. She purchased lunch at the cafeteria in her building or brought food from home. She worked her full shift without deviation. After work, she shopped for groceries 2 or 3 times weekly, always at the same stores. She visited Marina approximately twice per week, always at Marina's apartment. On Sundays, she took the train to Tver to see her mother, returning by evening. The surveillance logs recorded this mundane existence in exhaustive detail. June 23rd, subject departed residence, EO728, arrived workplace, 0802, lunch break, 12:45, cafeteria, departed work, 16:47, purchased bread and milk at Gastronome on Tverskaya, arrived residence 18:15. June the 24th followed an identical pattern, so did June 25th. Telephone monitoring presented particular irony. Larissa worked in telecommunications, routing calls for others, yet her own communications were now intercepted and recorded. The technical arrangements were simple. Her workplace switchboard was already monitored as a matter of security protocol for international connections. The communal telephone in her building required only standard intercept protocols. Every conversation was logged, significant ones transcribed. On June 24th, that monitoring captured something relevant. At 1:17 p.m. during her lunch break, Larissa received a call from Philippe Mercier. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He asked if she would meet him again, perhaps on Saturday. She agreed. They arranged to meet at 3:00 p.m. near the Tretyakov Gallery. The surveillance team assigned to Saturday duty received detailed briefings. Photographic documentation was authorized. 2 officers with cameras would position themselves near the gallery, capturing images of the meeting for the case file. The photographs, still preserved in the declassified archive, show Larissa and Mercier standing near the gallery entrance, then walking together along the embankment. She wore a light summer dress, carried a small purse. He wore slacks and a short-sleeved shirt, carried what appeared to be a notebook. In one image, they're seated on a bench, engaged in conversation. In another, Larissa is smiling at something he's said. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Directional microphones captured fragments of their conversation, though ambient noise and distance made complete recording impossible. They discussed Russian art. She had visited the gallery many times and served as informal guide. They talked about her work, his journalism, cultural differences. Nothing in the captured audio suggested espionage or recruitment, yet the very ordinariness of the conversation raised questions for investigators. When does innocent cultural exchange become suspicious collaboration? This question occupied several paragraphs of Sokolov's June 28th analysis. Soviet doctrine held that Western intelligence services used journalists as cover for recruitment operations. Mercier's interest in Larissa seemed disproportionate given her lack of access to sensitive information. Unless, Sokolov theorized, the approach was long-term cultivation, building trust before making any direct requests. The recommendation was unanimous: continue surveillance, expand coverage, wait for the relationship to reveal its true nature. While Larissa returned to her ordinary Friday evening, dinner in her room, reading before sleep, her file grew thicker. Every mundane detail of her life was now catalogued, analyzed, preserved. The gap between her reality and the state's interpretation of that reality had begun to widen. She remained unaware that 47 pages of documentation now existed with her name on the cover. The fourth meeting took place on July the 2nd at Gorky Park. Mercier had suggested it during a brief telephone call 3 days earlier, captured and transcribed by monitoring personnel. They met at the main entrance at 2:00 p.m. Surveillance teams noted cloudy weather, moderate crowd density, favorable conditions for close observation. They walked along the main pathway toward the Moskva River embankment. Photographic documentation shows them stopping at an ice cream kiosk, then sitting on a bench near the fountain. The conversation lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. Directional microphone coverage captured approximately 60% of their exchange, though technical limitations and ambient noise created gaps in the recording. The transcripts reveal mundane topics. Larissa described her work in more detail: the old equipment, the challenging international connections, the occasional interesting call she routed. Mercier asked about her childhood in Tver, her family, her education. He mentioned his own background: university in Paris, early journalism career covering local politics, assignment to Moscow as career advancement. Nothing in the recorded dialogue suggested intelligence activity. Yet Lieutenant Sokolov's analysis, filed on July 5th, interpreted the conversation differently. Mercier's questions about telecommunications infrastructure, even general inquiries, could serve intelligence purposes. His interest in Larissa's family background might identify potential leverage points. The lengthening duration of their meetings, from 45 minutes initially to over 2 hours, suggested deepening relationship that could facilitate future exploitation. The fifth meeting occurred on July 9th. Larissa had finished her shift at 5:00 p.m. and, rather than going directly home, walked to a bookstore on Kalinin Prospect. Mercier was already there, browsing the foreign literature section. Whether they had arranged this beforehand or the encounter was coincidental remained unclear. No telephone intercepts had captured advance planning. Surveillance officers positioned inside the bookstore documented the interaction. They examined books together for approximately 40 minutes. Larissa selected a collection of Chekhov's stories. Mercier purchased a Russian-French dictionary. The cashier, questioned weeks later, remembered nothing unusual about the transaction. They were simply two people buying books. The photographs from that afternoon show Larissa reaching for a volume on an upper shelf while Mercier holds several books for her. Another image captures them reading passages together, heads bent close over an open book. A third shows them at the cashier's counter, mid-conversation, apparently at ease with each other. After leaving the bookstore, they walked to a nearby cafe and talked for another hour. This meeting brought their total documented contact time to approximately 8 hours across 5 encounters spanning 3 weeks. The pattern was unmistakable. KGB analysis struggled with interpretation. Was this genuine friendship developing between lonely foreigner and curious Soviet citizen, or was it textbook recruitment operation progressing through cultivation phase? The file on Mercier offered no definitive answers. Philippe Mercier's background, compiled from multiple intelligence sources, showed standard Western journalist profile. Born in Marseille in 1942, educated at the Sorbonne, employed by Le Figaro since 1967. His articles from Moscow covered cultural events, human interest stories, occasional political analysis within acceptable parameters. He maintained contacts with other foreign correspondents, attended embassy functions, traveled when permitted to cities outside Moscow. 2 details raised suspicion. First, his father had worked for the French Foreign Ministry, retiring in 1970 after a career that included postings in several Eastern European capitals. Family connections to diplomatic services always warranted scrutiny. Second, his Moscow apartment building housed 3 other Western journalists, 2 of whom had suspected intelligence ties. Proximity could indicate coordination or could mean nothing. Housing for foreigners was limited, and assignments often clustered journalists together. The assessment remained inconclusive. Subject Mercier, possibly affiliated with French intelligence services, evidence insufficient for definitive determination. What they discussed, pieced together from multiple sources, revealed Larissa's gradual opening. Early conversations had been guarded, surface level. By the 5th meeting, she spoke more freely about frustrations at work, the outdated equipment, the bureaucratic inefficiency, supervisors who cared more about quotas than quality. She mentioned feeling stuck in life, uncertain about her future. These were common complaints among Soviet citizens, barely political, yet they demonstrated growing trust. Mercier reciprocated with his own admissions. He found Moscow isolating despite being surrounded by people. Official Soviet contacts provided only scripted interactions. He missed genuine conversation, the kind he could have with Larissa. Changes in Larissa's behavior, subtle but noticeable, appeared in informant reports from her workplace. On July 6th, a co-worker noted she wore a new scarf, blue with white pattern, nicer than her usual accessories. On July 11th, another colleague detected different perfume, something slightly floral. These observations entered the file as potential indicators of romantic interest or rewards for cooperation. Her work performance showed minor degradation. She seemed distracted during her July 8th shift, making 2 routing errors that required supervisor correction. The supervisor's report described her as preoccupied, not fully attentive to duties. Another colleague observed her staring out the window during breaks, apparently lost in thought. Marina Stepanova noticed the changes more acutely. During her interrogation in September 1976, documented in a 17-page transcript, Marina recalled conversations from this period. Larissa had mentioned meeting an interesting person, a foreigner who asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to her answers. She seemed excited by the friendship, perhaps flattered by the attention. "Did she seem aware of any danger?" the interrogator asked. "No," Marina replied. "She thought it was innocent. Cultural exchange, she called it." Warning signs existed had Larissa been trained to recognize them. The same man in the grey coat appeared near her building 3 mornings in a week, surveillance officer Petrov, rotating shifts with 2 colleagues. A repair van parked on her street for 5 consecutive days with no visible work being performed. Mobile observation post equipped with cameras and recording equipment. The woman who seemed always to be shopping at the same gastronome at the same time Larissa shopped. Officer Lebedeva tasked with monitoring grocery purchases for any unusual patterns. Larissa noticed none of this. Why would she? She had committed no crime, harbored no secrets, done nothing wrong. The surveillance apparatus was designed to be invisible to those unfamiliar with its methods. Surveillance logs from this period filled pages with timestamps and locations. July 2nd, 1358. Subject departed residence, walked toward metro station. July 2nd, 1403. Subject met Mercier at park entrance. July 2nd, 1620. Subjects departed park, separated at metro. July 9th, 1712. Subject entered bookstore Kalinin Prospect. July 9th, 1718. Mercier already present in bookstore. July 9th, 1935. Subjects departed cafe, separated at trolleybus stop. Each entry built the case incrementally. Each documented contact added weight to the file. The bureaucratic machinery processed her ordinary life into evidence of potential state security threat. By mid-July, case file 2847L had expanded to 94 pages. Lieutenant Sokolov's latest assessment recommended continued surveillance with authorization for more intrusive measures if contact frequency increased. His superior, Major Orlov, concurred. A notation appeared on July the 14th. Escalate monitoring protocols. Prepare contingency for intervention if recruitment attempt observed. The machine was patient. It would watch and wait, documenting everything until the relationship revealed its true nature or provided sufficient justification for action. Larisa, walking home from work on July the 15th with her new book of Chekhov stories, remained unaware that her life had become an intelligence operation. July the 16th, 1976. The 8th meeting occurred at a restaurant on Smolenskaya Square, 3 blocks from the Foreign Ministry. Mercier had suggested it during a telephone call the previous evening, a conversation intercepted and flagged by monitoring personnel as the first time he had specifically requested a meeting near government buildings. They arrived separately. Larisa came directly from work at 5:30 p.m., still wearing her telegraph office uniform blouse under a light jacket. Mercier was already seated at a corner table when she entered. The restaurant was moderately crowded with ministry workers finishing late dinners, foreign embassy staff, the usual mix of people who frequented establishments in this district. 3 KGB officers were present. One posed as a diner 2 tables away, close enough to observe but not close enough to appear suspicious. Another worked as a waiter, recently inserted into the restaurant staff specifically for such operations. The third monitored from a van outside, coordinating photographic coverage through the restaurant's front windows. The conversation began normally. They ordered tea and small plates of food, pickles, bread, cheese. Mercier asked about her week. She described a particularly frustrating day when equipment failures had disrupted service for 6 hours. They talked about an article he was writing on Moscow's transportation system. 40 minutes passed in routine exchange. Then Mercier shifted the conversation. According to the surveillance report filed the following morning, he began by expressing appreciation for their friendship. He valued her insights into Soviet life, her willingness to explain things foreign correspondents rarely understood. His editors in Paris, he explained, wanted more authentic detail in his reporting. Would she be willing to help him occasionally with background information? The waiter officer noted hesitation in Larisa's response. She asked what kind of information he meant. Technical details, Mercier said, nothing classified or sensitive. For instance, he was writing about international communications and how calls were routed between Moscow and Western Europe. Could she explain the general process? Just the basics, the kind of information anyone familiar with telecommunications might know. Larisa was quiet for approximately 30 seconds. The surveillance report captured this pause as significant, noting subject displayed visible uncertainty, facial expression suggested internal deliberation. She asked why he needed this information. For accuracy, he replied. His articles often contained technical errors that embarrassed him with knowledgeable readers. Having a friend who understood these systems would improve his journalism. The request seemed reasonable. She worked in telecommunications. He wrote about Soviet infrastructure. The information was general, unclassified, the kind of thing probably available in technical manuals if anyone bothered to look. Nothing about the request suggested espionage, yet something about the moment unsettled her. She told him she needed to think about it. They finished their meal with conversation noticeably more strained. Mercier paid the bill at 7:15 p.m. They parted outside the restaurant with plans to speak by telephone in a few days. What followed was documented in unusual detail. Rather than taking the metro home as usual, Larissa began walking. The surveillance team, expecting her standard route, had to quickly adjust coverage. She walked south toward the river, then west along the embankment, seemingly without destination. The walk lasted 3 hours. She moved slowly, stopping frequently on benches, staring at the water. At one point she stood for 20 minutes watching boats pass. The surveillance log tracked every turn. 1947, subject crossed bridge to North Bank. 2012, subject seated on bench near Krimsky Bridge. 2031, subject resumed walking east. 2108, subject stopped at closed kiosk, stood motionless for 8 minutes. Officer Sokolov's analysis described the walk as behavioral pattern consistent with individual processing difficult decision. The extended wandering, the aimless movement, the obvious reluctance to return home, all suggested internal conflict. She finally arrived at her building at 10:43 p.m. The concierge noted her appearance, distracted, tired, troubled. She went directly to her room without greeting other residents in the communal spaces. What Larissa couldn't know was that the request itself constituted a test. Soviet counterintelligence doctrine held that intelligence services tested potential agents with small requests before escalating to larger ones. The content of the request mattered less than the subject's response. Agreement demonstrated willingness to cooperate with foreign nationals in ways that violated social norms, even if technically legal. Refusal indicated the subject recognized inappropriate nature of the request and might report it to authorities. Either response provided valuable intelligence. Agreement opened pathway for escalation. Refusal identified the subject as unsuitable for recruitment, but potentially useful as false lead to occupy Western intelligence resources. The request triggered immediate bureaucratic escalation. Case file 2847L was transferred from routine monitoring to active counterintelligence investigation. Major Orlov's authorization memo, dated July 17th, redesignated the case priority level from 3 to 1. New surveillance teams with enhanced capabilities were assigned. Authorization was granted for apartment entry during Larissa's absence to install listening devices. The enhanced protocol took effect July 18th. 4 additional officers joined the surveillance rotation. Technical teams entered her room on July 19th while she was at work, installing a microphone behind the radiator and another in the light fixture. The operation took 17 minutes. Nothing appeared disturbed. On July the 18th, Larissa telephoned Marina from the communal hallway telephone. The intercept captured a conversation in which Larissa described meeting someone who had asked her a strange favor. She didn't elaborate on details, but expressed uncertainty about how to respond. Marina advised caution with foreigners, not from suspicion of intelligence operations, but from general Soviet wariness of international contact. "You could get in trouble," Marina said. The statement, preserved in the transcript, was prophetic. For 2 days, Larissa made no contact with Mercier. Surveillance teams documented her normal routine. Work, home, grocery shopping. She appeared preoccupied. Co-workers noted her subdued mood. She ate lunch alone rather than in the cafeteria with colleagues. The newly installed listening devices captured her evening activities. On July the 20th, she spent 3 hours reading technical manuals from work, materials she had brought home, which itself violated regulations. On July 21st, the microphones recorded her pacing in her small room, the creak of floorboards marking repetitive movement suggestive of anxiety. On July 22nd, she telephoned Mercier. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She agreed to meet him the following day. Meeting 9 occurred July 23rd at Gorky Park, same location as their 4th encounter. They sat on a bench near the river. Larissa brought a handwritten note, approximately 1 page, folded in quarters. Photographic surveillance captured the moment she removed it from her purse and handed it to Mercier. The note was never recovered. Mercier presumably kept it. But Larissa's room microphones had recorded her writing it the previous evening. She had drafted it carefully, speaking aloud as she wrote, "International calls route through Central Exchange. Trunk lines connect to border stations. Switching occurs at designated points." The content was indeed general, technical overview rather than classified specifications. Yet the act of writing it, of handing it to a foreign national, of providing information at his request, this crossed an invisible line. The state's interpretation of her action would not consider technical classification levels or the actual sensitivity of information. The state would consider only that she had cooperated with a foreigner's request for information about Soviet systems. Lieutenant Sokolov's report, filed that evening, was unambiguous. Subject has demonstrated willingness to provide information to foreign national. Recommend immediate consideration of detention for full investigation. The wheels of the machine began turning faster. Larissa returned home that afternoon believing she had helped a friend understand telecommunications for a newspaper article. She had no sense that her life had fundamentally changed. The handwritten note seemed so innocuous, the information so basic, the gesture so small. But small gestures in the machinery of the Soviet state could carry enormous weight. The file on her desk now exceeded 150 pages. August arrived with warm weather and clear skies. Larissa's daily routine showed no visible disruption. She left for work each morning at her usual time, performed her duties at the Central Telegraph Office, returned home each evening. To any casual observer, her life proceeded along its established track. Employment records from August 1976 show her performance had actually improved. After the brief period of distraction in July, she received commendation on August the 4th for efficiently handling the complex connection to London during equipment malfunction. Her supervisor's evaluation noted exemplary problem-solving under pressure. She took no sick days. Her punctuality remained perfect. Yet beneath this surface normalcy, the machinery continued its work. 3 more meetings with Mercier occurred in August. The first was on August the 6th at a cafe near the Bolshoi Theatre. Surveillance transcripts show they discussed Soviet ballet. Mercier was writing an article on cultural institutions. Larissa had brought another handwritten note, this one describing how the telegraph office coordinated communications during major performances when foreign press filed stories. Technical details about priority routing, nothing classified. She handed it to him as they drank tea. The second meeting, August the 14th, took place at VDNKH, the exhibition of achievements of national economy. They spent the afternoon walking through pavilions devoted to Soviet technological progress. A surveillance photograph from that day shows them standing beneath a model of a Soyuz spacecraft, Larissa pointing upward, apparently explaining something. Another image captures them at the telecommunications pavilion, examining displays of satellite equipment. The irony was not lost on intelligence analysts. She was touring exhibits about the very systems she was describing to a foreign journalist. Their third August meeting occurred on the 27th in Gorky Park again, now a familiar location. Duration, 2 hours and 40 minutes. She provided a third note, this one explaining general procedures for international telegram transmission. The content remained unclassified, basic infrastructure information. But the pattern was clear. Regular provision of technical data at foreign nationals' request. Behind the scenes, military intelligence analysts assessed the material's value. A report dated August 30th concluded the information held minimal operational significance, but demonstrated subjects' willingness to fulfill intelligence collection tasking. The distinction was crucial. The data itself might be nearly worthless, but Larissa's compliance indicated potential for recruitment to more sensitive tasks. This analysis fed directly into legal preparations. On August the 19th, senior officials at the Second Chief Directorate began constructing the framework for prosecution under Article 64 of the RSFSR Criminal Code, treason. The statute defined treason broadly: espionage, transmission of state or military secrets to a foreign state, or rendering aid to a foreign state in carrying out hostile activity against the USSR. The challenge lay in proving state secrets were involved. The information Larissa provided was arguably public knowledge. Prosecutors therefore focused on the rendering aid clause. Her assistance to a suspected foreign intelligence operative constituted aid to hostile activity, regardless of classification levels. Legal memoranda circulated through various departments. Did the case meet evidentiary standards? Would a closed tribunal convict based on available documentation? The consensus emerged slowly but definitively. Yes, sufficient basis existed for arrest and prosecution. While bureaucrats debated legal technicalities, Larissa lived her ordinary life. She visited her mother in Tver on August 8th, taking the morning train and returning by evening. The surveillance team documented the visit, her mother's apartment, their walk to the market, the hours spent over tea discussing family matters. Her mother appeared healthy, cheerful. They talked about Larissa's sister Natasha, whose wedding was planned for October. The wedding became a recurring topic in intercepted communications. Larissa telephoned Natasha twice in August to discuss preparations. She agreed to help with arrangements, promised to travel to Tver the weekend before to assist. The room microphones captured her making notes about the wedding, calculating costs for a gift, discussing details with Marina. She was planning for autumn. The state was planning her disappearance. On August 23rd, Larissa wrote a letter to a friend in Leningrad, a former classmate from her technical course. She wrote it in her room, the hidden microphones recording the scratch of pen on paper. The letter described her summer, mentioned meeting an interesting French journalist, expressed contentment with her life despite its routine nature. She sealed the envelope, placed a stamp, and deposited it in the building's outgoing mail slot the following morning. The letter never reached its destination. Standard mail intercept protocols routed it to a processing center where it was opened, photographed, and added to her file. The original was retained as evidence. Her friend in Leningrad never knew Larissa had written. The bureaucratic machinery accelerated through late August. Reports accumulated, surveillance summaries, informant assessments, legal analyses, background investigations. Each document required review, approval, filing. Chains of command extended upward through the hierarchy. Every action needed authorization from someone higher. On August the 25th, Lieutenant Sokolov submitted a comprehensive case summary recommending immediate detention and full interrogation to determine extent of cooperation with Foreign Intelligence Service. Major Orlov endorsed the recommendation on August the 27th. It moved to department chief level on August the 30th to directorate leadership on September 1st. The approval process followed predictable patterns established through decades of practice. Forms were completed, justifications articulated, precedents cited. The machinery valued procedure, documentation, bureaucratic correctness. Nothing happened quickly, but once momentum built, nothing stopped it. Authorization for arrest was signed on September the 8th. The order specified timing, location, personnel involved, items to be seized. 6 officers would conduct the operation. Entry at approximately 6:45 a.m. to minimize resistance and ensure element of surprise. Transport directly to Lefortovo prison. Detention incommunicado pending investigation. September the 3rd brought the final meeting between Larissa and Philippe Mercier. They met at a café on Arbat Street in the early evening. His assignment in Moscow was ending. He would depart September 13th, returning to Paris. This was goodbye. Surveillance teams documented a quieter interaction than previous meetings. They talked for 90 minutes. No notes were exchanged. Mercier gave her a small gift, wrapped in paper. Later, inventory would reveal a collection of French poetry. She thanked him, seemed genuinely sad about his departure. They parted with what appeared to be warm wishes for each other's futures. The surveillance photographs show them shaking hands on the sidewalk outside the cafe. Larissa is smiling, though the image quality makes reading her expression difficult. Mercier is half turned toward the street, apparently preparing to hail a taxi. It was the last time they would see each other. Mercier would leave Moscow on schedule 10 days later, his departure documented but unimpeded. His file remained open, his activities in subsequent years monitored when possible, but no action was ever taken against him. Whether he was actually affiliated with French intelligence or simply a journalist who befriended a lonely woman remained officially undetermined. For Larissa, the days following that final meeting passed in ordinary fashion. She worked her shifts, had dinner with Marina on September the 6th, telephoned her mother on September 7th to confirm plans for visiting the following weekend. The room microphones captured her humming while preparing tea, the sound of her turning pages in a book. Normal evening routines. On the evening of September the 10th, she laid out her work clothes for the following day, set her alarm clock for 6:15 a.m., and went to sleep. In offices across Moscow, the final preparations were completed. Officers reviewed their assignments, transport vehicles were fueled and positioned. The arrest warrant was placed in proper hands. The invisible trap had closed completely. Only the spring remained to be triggered. At 6:42 a.m. on September 11, 1976, 3 men would enter her building and erase her from normal life. But on the night of September the 10th, Larissa slept peacefully, dreaming perhaps of her sister's wedding, of autumn in Moscow, of whatever. Small hopes sustained her through ordinary days. The machinery waited, patient and inexorable, for morning. On the morning of September 11, 1976, at 6:42 a.m., 3 men entered the communalka where Larissa Borodina slept. They moved with practiced efficiency. Lieutenant Sokolov led, flanked by 2 junior officers whose names appear in the operational report as Lebedev and Karpov. They carried the arrest warrant, search authorization and inventory forms. The concierge, Klavdia Semyonovna, had been instructed to unlock the building's main entrance and remain in her ground floor room. She complied without question. The building was quiet. Most residents still slept. The men climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, their footsteps deliberate but not rushed. At 6:44 a.m. they knocked on the door to Larissa's room, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the communal hallway. Testimony from neighbors collected during subsequent investigation of the investigation itself in the 1990s described the sounds. The knock, a pause of perhaps 10 seconds, the door opening, a male voice, official and clipped, speaking words the neighbors couldn't quite distinguish through walls. No shouting, no struggle, just low voices and the sounds of movement. Larissa answered the door in her night clothes, disoriented by the early hour. Sokolov identified himself and presented the warrant. She was under arrest on suspicion of activities harmful to state security. She would need to accompany them immediately. The search began at 6:47 a.m. The protocol document, declassified in 1997, lists every action with bureaucratic precision. Officer Lebedev photographed the room from multiple angles before anything was disturbed. Officer Karpov began systematic examination of Larissa's possessions, while Sokolov supervised, and Larissa dressed behind a curtain, hastily rigged across one corner. What they took 2 notebooks containing handwritten entries about her daily life, nothing incriminating but retained as potential evidence. 14 photographs, mostly family snapshots, but including 2 showing her with Mercier at VDNKH. 17 letters from various correspondents, her mother, her sister, Marina, former classmates. Her address book, a small leather-bound volume containing perhaps 40 names and telephone numbers. A calendar with notations marking meetings, though none explicitly referenced Mercier by name. They searched, methodically, the wardrobe, the desk drawers, the small trunk under her bed where she kept winter clothing. They examined books on her shelf, flipping through pages, checking for hidden materials. They removed the back panel of her radio. They felt along the windowsill, checked beneath the mattress, looked inside the teapot on her small electric burner. The entire search lasted 9 minutes. At 6:56 a.m., Larissa signed the inventory of seized items. Her signature, reproduced in the declassified file, shows slight tremor in the letters. By this point, other residents had emerged into the hallway. They stood in doorways, watching silently. No one asked questions. No one objected. This was the Soviet Union in 1976. When state security officers came, neighbors looked away. Larissa was escorted down the stairs at 6:58 a.m. A black Volga sedan waited at the curb, engine running. She was placed in the back seat between Lebedev and Karpov. Sokolov sat in front beside the driver. The vehicle departed at 6:59 a.m. Total elapsed time from building entry to departure, 14 minutes. The drive to Lefortovo prison took 23 minutes through morning Moscow. Traffic was light. The route logged in the operational report proceeded along main boulevards. No attempt was made at concealment. Lefortovo's location was well known, its purpose understood by anyone who recognized the fortress-like structure. They arrived at 7:22 a.m. Larissa was processed through intake. Photographed, fingerprinted, stripped of personal effects, issued prison clothing. The intake log records her height as 162 centimeters, weight as 56 kilograms, no distinguishing marks or tattoos, general health satisfactory. Her cell was in the internal prison block reserved for political cases. Cell 47, second floor. The space measured 2.5 meters by 3 meters. A metal bed frame with thin mattress occupied one wall. A small table and stool stood bolted to the floor. A toilet in the corner, no privacy partition. A single barred window, high on the wall, admitted limited daylight. The walls were painted institutional green, showing patches where previous paint had flaked away. Isolation protocols were absolute, no contact with other prisoners, meals delivered through a slot in the steel door, exercise alone in a small courtyard for 30 minutes daily, weather permitting, no visitors, no letters, no telephone calls. Complete informational quarantine designed to maximize psychological pressure and eliminate external support. She spent the first hours sitting on the bed. Guards observed through the peephole every 15 minutes, noting her condition in their log. At 9:30 a.m. she ate the provided breakfast, black bread, weak tea, thin porridge. At 11:20 a.m. she paced the cell. At 12:15 p.m. she lay down and appeared to sleep. The first interrogation began at 2:30 p.m. 2 officers escorted her to a room on the ground floor, windowless and spare. A table, 3 chairs, a lamp directed at the chair where she would sit. Lieutenant Sokolov conducted the session with Major Orlov present as supervisor. The interrogation lasted 4 hours. The transcript runs to 32 pages. It began with biographical questions establishing identity, residence, employment history, information they already possessed, but asked to create baseline responses. Then the focus shifted. When did you first meet the French national Philippe Mercier? June 18th, near Pushkin Square. "How many times did you meet him?" she counted. 12 times, perhaps 13. "Did he ask you to provide information?" "Yes, about telecommunications." "What information did you provide?" "General technical details, routing procedures, nothing classified." "Did you understand this constituted cooperation with a foreign intelligence operative?" "He was a journalist. I was helping with background for articles." "Were you aware such contact violates Soviet security protocols?" She hesitated. She thought it was innocent cultural exchange. The questions continued, circling back, rephrasing, probing for inconsistencies. Sokolov's approach was methodical rather than aggressive. He built a record, established facts, created a foundation for the case against her. Orlov interjected occasionally with sharper questions, but mostly observed. Larisa maintained her position. She believed Mercier was simply a journalist. Their friendship was innocent. The information she provided was unclassified and freely available. She showed no awareness of espionage implications. Whether this was genuine naivety or defensive strategy remained unclear to her interrogators. The session ended at 6:30 p.m. She was returned to her cell. Dinner arrived at 7:00 p.m. Cabbage soup, more bread, tea. She ate little. Guards noted she cried quietly for approximately 40 minutes after the meal. While Larisa spent her first day in Lefortovo, the machinery of her disappearance operated elsewhere. Her workplace received official notification at 10:00 a.m. Borodina, L.M., granted indefinite medical leave effective immediately. No details provided. Her supervisor asked no questions. The phrasing indicated state security involvement, which precluded inquiry. Her workstation was cleared by noon. Personal items, a mug, a small mirror, a sweater she kept for cold days, were boxed and placed in storage. Another operator assumed her duties. By afternoon, it was as if she had never worked there. Her mother in Tver attempted contact on September 12th. She telephoned the Kommunalka first. A neighbor answered, told her Larisa was unavailable, offered no explanation. Confused, her mother called the telegraph office. The supervisor said Larisa was on medical leave and could not be reached. Her mother asked for details about the illness. The supervisor said she had no additional information. The mother called back 3 times over the next 2 days. Each call yielded the same responses: unavailable, medical leave, no information, no one acknowledged an arrest, no official notification arrived. Her daughter had simply vanished into administrative void. On September 13th, Philippe Mercier departed Moscow on Air France Flight 1842 to Paris, departing Sheremetyevo Airport at 3:15 p.m. KGB officers observed his departure, but did not detain or question him. His luggage was not searched beyond standard customs procedures. He carried a notebook containing observations from his Moscow assignment and a manuscript for articles he planned to write. He would learn of Larisa's arrest only months later, through unofficial channels. By then there was nothing he could do. Whether he ever felt responsibility for her fate or simply viewed her as collateral damage in larger geopolitical games remains unknown. He never published anything about her case. In cell 47 at Lefortovo, Larisa spent her second night in detention lying awake on the thin mattress, staring at shadows on the ceiling cast by light filtering through the high window. The walls seemed to press inward. The silence was absolute. She had 14 minutes to pack her life. Now she had years to contemplate what those 14 minutes meant. Lefortovo operated on rigid schedule. Wake up at 6:00 a.m., announced by electric bell that rang throughout the cell block. Breakfast at 6:30. Exercise period at 9 until exactly 30 minutes in a concrete yard enclosed by walls 4 meters high. Lunch at noon. Dinner at 6:00 p.m. Lights out at 10:00 p.m., though dim bulbs remained illuminated through the night for guard observation. Between these fixed points, time dissolved into formless waiting. Larissa had no books, no writing materials, no radio, nothing to mark the passage of hours except the changing quality of light through her cell's high window. She sat on the bed. She paced 7 steps from wall to wall, 12 steps, length to width. She stared at the door. She counted the paint flakes on the ceiling. She existed in suspended animation, removed from normal human activity. Interrogations punctuated this routine with unpredictable frequency. Sometimes 3 days would pass in silence. Sometimes officers came twice in a single day. The irregularity was intentional, designed to prevent psychological adjustment, to keep subjects off balance and anxious. On September 28th, 17 days after her arrest, formal charges were presented. Lieutenant Sokolov read them aloud in the interrogation room while Larissa sat under the harsh lamp. Article 64 of the RSFSR Criminal Code, treason through providing assistance to foreign state in carrying out hostile activity against the USSR. Maximum penalty, death by firing squad. Minimum, 15 years deprivation of freedom. The document specified that between June and September 1976, she had knowingly and willfully transmitted information regarding Soviet telecommunications infrastructure to French nationals suspected of intelligence affiliation, thereby rendering material aid to foreign intelligence service engaged in activities directed against state security interests of the Soviet Union. She was asked if she understood the charges. She said yes, but maintained she had committed no crime. Sokolov noted her response in the protocol and returned her to her cell. Outside Lefortovo's walls, her family searched desperately through bureaucratic labyrinth. Her mother traveled from Tver to Moscow on September 15th, the first day she could arrange time away from work. She went first to the Kommunalka, where neighbors told her only that Larissa had been taken away by officials. She went to the local militia station. No record of any arrest of Larissa Borodina existed in their files, the desk officer told her. Perhaps try the district office. The district office sent her to city headquarters. City headquarters directed her to the procurator's office. The procurator's office had no information but suggested the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The ministry claimed no knowledge and recommended she return to the local militia station. She spent 3 days navigating this circuit, passed from office to office, each functionary expressing polite bewilderment and directing her elsewhere. The Kafkaesque quality was deliberate. State security cases were handled outside normal administrative channels, and officials in those normal channels either genuinely knew nothing or understood that claiming ignorance was safer than acknowledging involvement. On her 4th day in Moscow, exhausted and frightened, she sat on a bench outside the procurator's office and wept. A woman passing by stopped, asked what was wrong. After hearing the story, the woman lowered her voice and said, "If security organs took her, she's beyond your reach. Go home. Wait. They'll contact you if they want you to know anything." This was the only honest guidance she received. Marina Stepanova began her own search on September 16th. She went to the telegraph office, where the supervisor repeated only that Larissa was on medical leave. She went to the apartment building, learned about the early morning arrest. She tried filing a missing person report at the militia station. It was refused on grounds that Larissa's location was known to appropriate authorities. On September 23rd, 2 KGB officers appeared at Marina's workplace. They escorted her to a small office in the building's basement for questioning. The session lasted 90 minutes. They asked about her friendship with Larissa, about what Larissa had told her regarding Mercier, about whether Marina had met the French journalist herself. They asked if Larissa had ever expressed anti-Soviet sentiments, discussed emigration, shown interest in foreign countries beyond normal curiosity. Marina answered carefully. She described Larissa as apolitical, conventional, perhaps naive, but certainly not treasonous. The officers took notes without comment. Before leaving, they informed her that discussing this conversation with anyone would itself constitute obstruction of state security investigation. She understood the message. She never tried to locate Larissa again. On October the 3rd, officials sealed Larissa's room. 2 officers arrived with inventory forms and packing materials. They catalogued every remaining possession: clothing, dishes, books, the bed frame, the small desk, everything. Items of potential evidentiary value went to KGB storage. Personal effects were boxed for eventual disposition. The furniture was marked for redistribution to other communal housing. The process took 4 hours. Other residents of the Kommunalka watched from the hallway as her life was reduced to numbered entries on forms. By evening, the room stood empty, scrubbed clean, ready for reassignment. Neighbors were told that Larissa had requested transfer to another city for personal reasons. The explanation satisfied no one, but was accepted without question. To ask more was to invite unwelcome attention. At the telegraph office, her former supervisor submitted paperwork officially terminating Larissa's employment on October 12th. The stated reason? Voluntary resignation for medical purposes. Her work history file was closed and sent to archives. The switchboard position was filled by a new hire who started October 15th and knew nothing of her predecessor. Within a month of her arrest, Larissa had been erased from daily Moscow life. Her room was gone, her job reassigned, her friends silenced, her family stonewalled. She had become a non-person, existing only in classified files and the memories of those who knew better than to speak her name. Lefortovo prison was designed for exactly this kind of erasure. Built in the 1880s, expanded and modernized by the Soviet state, it served as primary detention facility for political prisoners undergoing investigation. Its internal prison section held approximately 300 cells, most occupied by individuals whose cases would never appear in public courts, whose names would never appear in newspapers, who would simply vanish from society until released or transferred to labor camps years later. The psychological architecture was as important as the physical. Isolation prevented prisoners from forming alliances or sharing information. Uncertainty about interrogation timing prevented mental preparation. Lack of access to family or legal counsel eliminated external support. The system was designed to break resistance through grinding attrition rather than dramatic cruelty. Interrogation logs from late September and early October show sessions on the 14th, 18th, 22nd, 26th of September, then October 1st, 5th and 9th. Each lasted between 2 and 5 hours. The questions followed patterns, asking the same information in different ways, probing for contradictions, building a comprehensive timeline of her contact with Mercier. What interrogators wanted was full confession to espionage. They wanted her to acknowledge that she understood Mercier was an intelligence operative, that she had knowingly assisted foreign intelligence collection, that she had betrayed the Soviet state. They wanted details of all contacts, admission of intent to harm state security, expressions of remorse and cooperation. What they received was partial compliance mixed with consistent denial of criminal intent. Yes, she met Mercier. Yes, she provided information. Yes, she understood now that this was wrong. But no, she never believed she was committing espionage. No, she never intended to harm the Soviet Union. No, she was not recruited or paid. The friendship seemed innocent. She made a mistake, but not a crime. Her interrogators noted growing distress. The September 26th session transcript records her crying for extended periods, struggling to answer questions coherently. The October 5th log notes she appeared undernourished, requested medical attention for headaches. The October 9th session was cut short after 2 hours when she became too distraught to continue. Prison medical records from this period document weight loss, 5 kilograms in the first month. Sleep disturbance reported by guards observing through the cell door, peephole. Reduced food consumption. Symptoms consistent with severe anxiety and depression. By mid-October, she had been in detention for 5 weeks. No formal trial date had been set. No attorney had been appointed. Her mother still had no official confirmation of her whereabouts. Marina had ceased inquiries. The communal apartment room stood empty, already reassigned to a new tenant who knew nothing of the previous occupant. Larissa Borodina existed now only in interrogation transcripts, surveillance photographs, case file 2847L, and the institutional memory of a prison system designed to make people disappear. The vanishing was complete. November 4th, 1976. The trial of Larissa Mikhailovna Borodina convened at 9:00 a.m. in a special chamber of Moscow City Court reserved for cases involving state security. The room was small, windowless, located in a wing of the building, inaccessible to the public. No family members were present, no independent observers attended, no journalists were permitted. The proceedings were classified. 3 judges presided, seated behind an elevated bench. Judge Anatoly Grigorievich Suslov, a 52-year-old jurist with 17 years of experience in political cases, led the tribunal. 2 junior judges flanked him, their role largely ceremonial. Suslov would make all substantive decisions. Court records list their names as Petrova, V.I., and Markov, S.N. Neither spoke during the 6 hours of testimony. The state-appointed defense attorney was Yevgeny Alexandrovich Volkov, age 43, employed by the Moscow City Legal Consultation Office. He had met Larissa once for 30 minutes on October 28th in a conference room at Lefortovo. That meeting, documented in his case notes, consisted primarily of him explaining the charges and advising her to cooperate fully with the court. He asked few questions about her version of events. She signed a form acknowledging his representation. Volkov specialized in such cases. His file, examined years later by researchers, showed he had defended 43 political defendants between 1971 and 1980. His client's conviction rate was 100%. Average sentence length was 9.2 years. He was competent in the narrow sense of understanding legal procedures, but his role was theatrical rather than adversarial. The system required defense counsel to maintain appearance of due process. Volkov fulfilled this requirement efficiently. The prosecutor was Senior Counselor of Justice Mikhail Petrovich Zhukov, attached to the USSR Procurator's Office. His specialization was Article 64 cases, treason prosecutions. He had prepared meticulously, though the outcome was never in doubt. The case file he brought to court exceeded 300 pages. Larissa was brought from Lefortovo at 8:30 a.m. in a prison transport van. She wore the same clothing she had been arrested in, now wrinkled and showing 2 months of continuous wear. She had lost additional weight. Her face appeared gaunt in the official photograph taken that morning. Guards escorted her to a defendant's cage, a small enclosed area separated from the courtroom by metal bars. She would deliver testimony from behind this barrier. The trial began with Judge Suslov reading the charges. His voice was measured, bureaucratic, conveying neither sympathy nor hostility. Larissa stood while he spoke, her hands gripping the bars of the cage. When he asked if she understood the charges, she replied, "Yes," in a voice barely audible beyond the first row. The prosecution presented its evidence systematically. First came the surveillance photographs, 37 images showing Larissa with Philippe Mercier at various locations between June and September. Zhukov displayed each one, noting dates and locations. The court accepted them as exhibits without objection from Volkov. Next came the handwritten notes she had provided to Mercier. 3 documents, photocopied before Mercier departed Moscow. KGB technical teams had entered his apartment on September the 10th and photographed materials in his possession. The notes described telecommunications routing procedures, international call protocols, technical infrastructure details. Zhukov argued these constituted classified information, though he provided no specific classification markings or authority demonstrating this status. Testimony from informants followed. The concierge from Larissa's building testified via written statement. She did not appear in person. She confirmed observing Larissa leave at unusual times, receive telephone calls from foreign-accented caller, exhibit behavioral changes suggesting clandestine activity. 3 co-workers from the telegraph office provided similar written statements noting her distraction, her possession of technical manuals outside work hours, her conversations about foreign countries. None of these witnesses were cross-examined. Volkov raised no objections to the hearsay nature of their statements. The court accepted all testimony as fact. Lieutenant Sokolov testified in person for 90 minutes. He described the investigation, surveillance methods, intercepted communications, evidence gathering. He characterized Larissa's meetings with Mercier as pattern consistent with recruitment and handling by foreign intelligence operative. When asked about Mercier's status, Sokolov stated, French national Philippe Mercier is suspected intelligence officer operating under journalistic cover. Assessment based on activities and contacts during Moscow assignment. The evidence presentation consumed the first 4 hours. Judge Suslov called recess at 1 p.m. Larissa was given bread and water, but not returned to Lefortovo. She remained in a holding cell adjacent to the courtroom. Proceedings resumed at 2:30 p.m. Larissa was called to testify. Her statement, transcribed in the court record, largely repeated what she had said during interrogations. She acknowledged meeting Mercier, acknowledged providing information, but denied understanding this constituted espionage. She described him as a journalist seeking cultural understanding. She characterized herself as naive but not treasonous. Did you not understand that providing information about Soviet systems to foreign nationals violates security protocols? Zhukov asked. I thought the information was general knowledge, she replied. Did you report these contacts to proper authorities? No. Did you inform your workplace supervisor? No. Did you consider that a foreign journalist might have ulterior motives? I didn't think about it that way. Her testimony lasted 45 minutes. Volkov asked her 3 questions, all essentially inviting her to express remorse. She stated she regretted her actions and recognized she had made serious mistakes. This concluded the defense case. Prosecutor Zhukov's closing argument occupied 30 minutes. He placed Larissa's case in broader context of Western intelligence operations. The Soviet Union faced constant threat from hostile foreign services seeking to exploit naive citizens. Intelligence agencies used journalists, businessmen, tourists as recruitment platforms. They targeted individuals with access to even minimally sensitive information, cultivating relationships through false friendship. Larissa's case exemplified this pattern perfectly. Innocent contact escalating to information provision, classic recruitment methodology. Whether Larissa understood the full implications of her actions was irrelevant, Zhukov argued. The law prohibited rendering assistance to foreign states in hostile activity. She had provided information to suspected intelligence operative. She had failed to report contact with foreigner. She had violated trust placed in her by Soviet state. Intent mattered less than action. He requested 8 years in strict regime labor camp. Volkov's defense consisted of 4 minutes asking for leniency based on her previously unblemished record and her cooperation during investigation. He did not challenge the facts, dispute the characterization of events, or argue legal interpretation. He simply asked the court to consider mitigating factors when determining sentence length. The trial concluded at 4:15 p.m. Judge Suslov announced the court would deliberate and deliver verdict the following morning. November the 5th, 1976, court reconvened at 10:00 a.m. Deliberation in such cases was largely theatrical. The verdict had been determined before trial began through consultations between judicial authorities, Procurator's Office, and KGB. Conviction rates in Article 64 cases during this period approached 100%. Acquittals were virtually unknown. Sentences varied only within narrow ranges based on perceived severity and defendant cooperation. Judge Suslov read the verdict for 12 minutes. Larisa Mikhailovna Borodina was found guilty of treason under Article 64 of the RSFSR Criminal Code. The court found she had willfully provided information regarding Soviet telecommunications infrastructure to foreign nationals engaged in intelligence collection activities. Her actions constituted rendering assistance to foreign state in hostile activity against USSR security interests. Sentence: 8 years deprivation of freedom in strict regime correctional labor colony. Larisa remained standing in the defendant's cage, gripping the bars. The court record notes she displayed no visible reaction. Whether this reflected shock, resignation, or emotional exhaustion was not documented. She was informed of her right to appeal. The deadline was 10 days from verdict. The appeals process began and ended with procedural efficiency. Volkov filed standard appeal documentation on November the 10th, arguing the sentence was excessive given mitigating circumstances. The appeal brief ran to 6 pages, most of which consisted of boilerplate language used in dozens of similar cases. The appeal was reviewed by a 3-judge panel on November 18th. No hearing was held. The panel spent approximately 40 minutes reviewing the case file before issuing a 2-page decision upholding the conviction and sentence in all respects. The decision cited the seriousness of the crime, the appropriate application of law, and the defendant's full awareness of her actions' implications. Larisa was informed of the appeal denial on November 19th. The sentence was now final. On November 22nd, an official notification letter was dispatched to Larisa's mother in Tver. The envelope was plain, bearing only the return address of Moscow City Court. The letter inside was typewritten, formal, brief. You are hereby informed that citizen Borodina, Larisa Mikhailovna, born 1947, has been convicted of crimes under Article 64 of the RSFSR Criminal Code and sentenced to 8 years deprivation of freedom in correctional labor colony of strict regime. Sentence is final and not subject to further review. The letter was signed by a court administrator whose name appeared as an illegible scrawl above a typed name and title. No details of the charges were provided, no information about the trial was included, no visitation rights were specified, no location of incarceration was given. The document conveyed only the minimum information legally required, conviction and sentence duration. Larisa's mother received the letter on November the 25th. She read it 3 times, sitting at her kitchen table in Tver, trying to comprehend how her daughter had gone from telephone operator to convicted traitor in 10 weeks. She had no one to ask for explanations, no attorney to consult, no appeals process available to her. Her daughter had been processed through a judicial system designed to function with maximum efficiency and minimum transparency. The letter provided one final piece of information. Larisa would be transferred to her assigned labor camp within 30 days. Further communication would be subject to camp regulations. In cell 47 at Lefortovo, Larisa marked her 60th day of detention. She now knew her destination and duration: 8 years in a strict regime camp. She was 29 years old. She would be 37 when released, if she survived. The trial had lasted 6 hours, the deliberation, minutes, the appeal review, 40 minutes. Justice in the Soviet system was nothing if not efficient. Transfer to Perm 35 labor camp occurred on December 3, 1976. Larisa was removed from Lefortovo at 4:30 a.m. and transported to Kazan station with 11 other convicted prisoners, 9 women, 2 men. They were loaded into a modified railroad car attached to a regular passenger train, a Stolypin car with barred compartments and armed guards. The journey took 6 days. Transport logs declassified in the 1990s document the route: Moscow to Kazan, layover of 14 hours. Kazan to Perm, 3 days with stops in Izhevsk and smaller stations. Perm to the camp, final leg by truck over deteriorating roads into the Ural foothills. Conditions were minimal: wooden benches, a waste bucket, bread and water twice daily. Temperature inside the unheated compartment dropped below freezing at night. They arrived at Perm 35 on December the 9th at approximately 3:00 p.m., the winter sky already darkening. The camp occupied a clearing carved from pine forest in the western Urals, roughly 30 kilometers from the city of Perm. Official designation: Corrective Labor Colony No. 35, strict regime. It had been established in 1946, initially housing common criminals, redesignated in 1972 for political prisoners exclusively. Capacity: 400 inmates. Actual population in December 1976, 387 according to administrative records. The perimeter was defined by wooden fence 4 meters high, topped with barbed wire. Watchtowers stood at each corner, manned by guards with automatic weapons. The zone, prisoner terminology for the enclosed camp area, contained 12 wooden barracks buildings, a mess hall, workshops, administrative offices, punishment cells, and a small medical facility. Beyond the fence, dense forest stretched in all directions. Escape attempts were rare and rarely successful. The isolation was geographical as much as architectural. Prisoner population consisted entirely of political cases, dissidents convicted under Article 70 for anti-Soviet agitation, Article 64 cases like Larisa, treason convictions, religious prisoners, Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, others who refused state control of worship, Ukrainian nationalists, a handful of ethnic Germans who had attempted emigration. No common criminals were housed here. The regime maintained strict separation to prevent political prisoners from organizing or influencing criminal populations. Camp regulations, preserved in archives, specified daily routine with military precision. Wake up at 6:00 a.m., roll call at 6:15, breakfast at 6:30, typically kasha, black bread, tea. Work assignments began at 7:00 a.m. and continued until 6:00 p.m. with 1-hour lunch break. Evening roll call at 6:30, dinner at 7:00, lights out at 10:00 p.m. Larisa was assigned to the textile workshop based on her documented employment history. The workshop occupied a large wooden building where prisoners operated industrial sewing machines producing military uniforms and canvas goods. Quotas were assigned daily, each prisoner expected to complete specific number of units. Failure to meet quota resulted in reduced rations or punishment cell confinement. Her camp file, reviewed decades later, shows her initial work performance as adequate. She met quotas, followed instructions, caused no disciplinary problems. The assessment from her first month noted, prisoner adapting to regime, no resistance behaviors observed. Correspondence was permitted once monthly, maximum 2 pages, subject to complete censorship. Letters were read by camp officials who redacted any content deemed inappropriate. complaints about conditions, political statements, information about other prisoners, criticism of Soviet system. Heavy black lines often obscured entire paragraphs. Her mother's letters, recovered from family archive after the Soviet collapse, revealed desperate attempts at connection. The first arrived in January 1977. "My dear Larochka, I received notice you are well. I think of you constantly. Your sister sends her love. She was married in October as planned. The weather here is very cold. I hope you are warm enough. Please write when you can. I love you, Mama." Simple sentences, nothing that could invite censorship. Emotion compressed into safe platitudes. Larissa's responses, copies retained in camp files, were equally constrained. "Dear Mama, I am fine. The work keeps me busy. I received your letter. Please give my congratulations to Natasha. I think of you and hope you are well." Larissa, 14 words conveying nothing beyond existence. The gap between what she wanted to say and what she could say was unbridgeable. Medical records chart her physical decline. Initial examination, December 10, 1976. Height 162 centimeters. Weight 51 kg. She had lost 11 kilograms since arrest. March 1977. Examination. Weight 48 kg. Complaint of persistent cough, diagnosed as upper respiratory infection, treated with minimal medication, June 1977, weight 46 kilos. Chronic bronchial inflammation noted, likely exacerbated by textile dust and cold workshop conditions. The records document other prisoners in fragments. Inmate Kuznetsova, EP, Article 70, shared Larissa's barracks. Inmate Tkachenko, MI, Article 64, worked adjacent station in textile workshop. These names appear occasionally in administrative documents. Disciplinary reports, medical logs, work assignments. Individual stories are lost, reduced to administrative notations. Political prisoners were segregated within the camp structure. They lived in separate barracks from different categories, ate at designated tables in the mess hall, worked in specific workshops. This isolation prevented coalition building and ensured atomization. Each prisoner experienced her sentence alone, surrounded by others but fundamentally separated. Religious prisoners maintained clandestine worship services despite prohibition. Ukrainian nationalists taught language and history to younger inmates. Dissidents shared forbidden poetry memorized from before. Arrest. These acts of resistance existed in whispers, in moments between official surveillance. Larissa participated minimally. She was not political, not religious, not nationalist. She was simply a woman serving time for friendship that violated invisible boundaries. May 1978 brought her mother's visit, the only one permitted during her entire sentence. Visitation rights for strict regime camps were severely limited. One visit of up to 2 hours per year, subject to approval, conducted under guard supervision in designated room with table between prisoner and visitor. The visitation log from May 14, 1978, documents the meeting. Duration, 1 hour 47 minutes. Present, prisoner Borodina, LM. Visitor Borodina, EN. Mother, Guard Sergeant Makarov, PS. The log notes no prohibited topics discussed, no contraband exchanged. Visit concluded without incident. What the log doesn't capture is documented nowhere. The sight of her mother's aged face, the tears neither mentioned in front of the guard, the mundane questions about Tver and family that carried weight of years of separation. Her mother's hands across the table, close but untouchable. Physical contact was prohibited. 2 hours to bridge 18 months of silence, conducted in wooden phrases that revealed nothing of interior devastation. Years accumulated in documentary fragments. Work reports. Prisoner Borodina continues meeting assigned quotas, demonstrates adequate compliance with camp regime. Medical notes. Patient reports chronic fatigue, persistent cough, weight stable at 47 kilos. Disciplinary records, no violations recorded 1979. The bureaucratic language of institutional custody, reducing human experience to administrative observations. A 1980 psychological assessment mandated for all prisoners at sentence midpoint noted subject displays withdrawn affect, minimal social engagement, compliant behavior pattern, no evidence of behavioral pathology requiring intervention. Prognosis for successful reintegration uncertain. The assessment captured her erasure more completely than its author likely intended. She had become compliant, withdrawn, uncertain, shaped by the institution that held her. The woman who had walked through Gorky Park discussing Chekhov with a French journalist existed now only in surveillance photographs filed in archives. What remained was prisoner number 2847, serving year 4 of 8. The textile workshop continued its rhythmic operation. Sewing machines clattered in rows. Quotas were met or not met. Guards changed shifts. Seasons cycled through their patterns. Brutal winters, brief summers, autumn mud. The Ural Mountains stood impassive beyond the fence, indifferent to the small human sufferings contained in the clearing carved from forest. Larissa sewed military uniforms. She wrote monthly letters to her mother. She endured respiratory infections. She marked time in the only way available, day by day, one identical to the next, accumulating slowly toward a distant release date that seemed more theoretical than real. Perm 35 was not designed to rehabilitate. It was designed to contain, to punish through deprivation and monotony, to demonstrate state power over individual life. In this purpose, it functioned with perfect efficiency. By 1982, she had served 6 years. 2 remained. September 11, 1984. 8 years to the day after her arrest, Larissa Borodina was released from Perm 35. The gates opened at 7:00 a.m. She walked out carrying a small cloth bag containing her few possessions, worn clothing, letters from her mother, internal passport stamped with restrictions that would define the rest of her life. She was 37 years old. She weighed 49 kilograms. Camp medical records noted chronic bronchial condition, malnourishment, dental problems requiring attention she would never receive. The exit examination took 15 minutes. Perfunctory documentation that her term had been completed. No outstanding disciplinary issues remained. The propiska, residence permit stamped in internal passports, determined where Soviet citizens could legally live. Article 64 convicts faced permanent restrictions. Moscow was forbidden. Leningrad, Kiev, all major cities were closed to her. She could not return to the life she had known, could not reclaim her room in the communalka, could not seek employment at the telegraph office or anywhere in the capital. The release officer handed her an assignment document. She was directed to report to Komsomolsk-on-Amur in the Soviet Far East, 6,200 kilometers from Moscow. The city was designated for released prisoners, political exiles, and workers in defense industries. Her propiska would permit residence there and nowhere else. She made the journey by train, 10 days across Siberia. No family met her at the station. Her mother could not afford the travel from Tver to such a distant city. Her sister Natasha, now with 2 children and a husband working in a Kalinin factory, sent a brief letter wishing her well but offering no possibility of visit. The distances were too great, the costs too high, the complications of associating with a former political prisoner too risky. Komsomolsk-on-Amur was a city of approximately 300,000, built during Stalin's industrialization campaigns along the Amur River. Grey concrete apartment blocks stretched along muddy streets. Factories dominated the economy: shipbuilding, metallurgy, aircraft production. The climate was harsh, winters brutal, summers humid and brief. Employment records show Larissa was hired by factory number 18, a textile plant producing industrial materials. Her work history at the telegraph office and 8 years in Perm 35's textile workshop qualified her for machine operation. She worked 10-hour shifts, 6 days weekly. Wages were minimal. She lived in a communal dormitory for factory workers, sharing a room with 3 other women. The surveillance never fully ended. KGB protocols required monitoring of released Article 64 convicts for minimum of 5 years post-release, often longer. Her file remained active. Local security organs received regular updates: employment status, residence changes, associations, behavior patterns. She was required to register with militia every 3 months. Any travel beyond city limits required approval. Letters between Larissa and her mother continued monthly, now uncensored, but marked by growing distance. Her mother's health deteriorated through the mid-1980s. Heart problems, mentioned first in a 1985 letter. Hospitalization in November 1986. Final illness in January 1987. Larissa received notification of her mother's death on January 15, 1987, via telegram delivered to the factory. She requested emergency travel permission to attend the funeral in Tver. The application was denied, insufficient justification for exception to travel restrictions. Her mother was buried on January 18th without her. Her sister Natasha's account, provided during a 1994 interview with a researcher documenting political repression, described the funeral. "We buried Mama knowing Larissa couldn't come. It felt wrong, incomplete. But what could we do? The system didn't care about funerals or families." Correspondence between the sisters dwindled after their mother's death. Natasha's letters arrived every few months, describing her children's achievements, her husband's work, ordinary family life. Larissa's responses grew shorter, more perfunctory. The gap between their experiences had become unbridgeable. One sister living normal Soviet life in European Russia, the other exiled to Far East, marked permanently by conviction. By 1989 they wrote twice yearly. By 1991 once yearly. The letters contained less with each exchange. What was there to say? Their lives had diverged so completely that finding common ground required excavating distant past neither wanted to revisit. The collapse of the Soviet Union in December 1991 changed everything and nothing. Travel restrictions theoretically ended. The KGB dissolved into successor agencies. Political prisoners were promised rehabilitation. But for Larissa, the transformation came too late. She died on March 7, 1992, in a clinic in Komsomolsk-on-Amur. Official cause: pneumonia. She had been admitted 4 days earlier with severe respiratory distress. Medical records note the underlying condition: chronic lung damage from years of textile work in poorly ventilated camps and factories, malnutrition that had never fully resolved, immune system compromised by prolonged deprivation. She was 45 years old. She died alone. No family present, no friends listed in hospital documentation. The clinic notified factory number 18, which notified her registered address. Her sister received a telegram on March the 10th. Burial occurred in Komsomolsk-on-Amur Municipal Cemetery on March 12th. No marker identified the grave. Factory records show one co-worker attended. The clinic disposed of her minimal possessions according to standard protocol. Rehabilitation came 4 years posthumously. In 1996, Natasha pursued legal review of her sister's conviction, one of thousands of such petitions filed as post-Soviet Russia attempted to address Stalin-era and Brezhnev-era repressions. The Moscow City Prosecutor's Office reviewed case file 2847L. The rehabilitation decision issued August 3, 1996, concluded, Conviction was based on politically motivated charges lacking substantive evidence of criminal activity. Contact with foreign national and provision of unclassified technical information did not constitute treason under objective legal standards. Conviction overturned, citizen Borodina LM declared victim of political repression. The document acknowledged injustice but restored nothing. Larisa had been dead 4 years. No compensation was provided to surviving family. No apology was issued. The rehabilitation was administrative correction, bureaucratic acknowledgement of error, nothing more. Philippe Mercier, the French journalist whose friendship had triggered the machinery, continued his career through the 1980s and 1990s. Researchers attempting to trace his story found he had covered European politics, written several books on Soviet society, retired to Provence in 1998. Contacted in 2003 by a historian researching Cold War surveillance cases, he expressed regret about Larisa's fate, but maintained he had been simply a journalist, never affiliated with intelligence services. No evidence ever emerged contradicting this claim. Whether he was truly innocent or successfully concealed, connections remains unknown. What is certain is that Larisa paid the price for their association regardless of his actual role. The machinery that consumed her operated on suspicion rather than evidence, on systemic paranoia rather than individual guilt. The question of what crime she actually committed has no satisfying answer. She met a foreigner. She answered his questions. She provided information that was technically unclassified but contextually suspect. She failed to report contact to authorities. She violated unwritten rules of acceptable behavior in a society where foreign contact itself constituted potential treason. Was meeting a foreigner her crime, or was her crime simply existing in a system where trust was illegal, where curiosity invited destruction, where ordinary human connection across national boundaries became basis for 8 years of imprisonment? The gap between her ordinary aspirations, friendship, conversation, modest connection beyond her routine life, and the state's interpretation of those aspirations, espionage, betrayal, treason, measured the distance between individual humanity and totalitarian logic. She wanted only what any person might want: someone to talk to, some relief from monotony, some recognition of her existence beyond her function as telephone operator and Soviet citizen. The state saw only threat, only potential subversion, only justification for its own perpetual vigilance. The permanent erasure was nearly complete. No memorial marks her grave in Komsomolsk-on-Amur. No monument acknowledges her story. Case file 2847-L sits in Russian archives, accessible to researchers but consulted rarely. Her life exists now primarily as administrative, documentation, surveillance logs, interrogation transcripts, court records, camp registers, employment files. A life converted to file numbers, a woman reduced to bureaucratic notations, an 8-year sentence for coffee with a foreigner. Larisa Borodina was born in 1947, arrested in 1976, convicted in 1976, imprisoned until 1984, exiled until her death in 1992. She was rehabilitated in 1996. These are the facts that survived. Everything else, her laughter, her thoughts, her dreams, her voice, her experience of those 8 years in Perm 35, her loneliness in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, her grief at missing her mother's funeral, her feelings about the friendship that destroyed her life, all of this dissolved into silence. The Soviet system that created case file 2847L no longer exists. The men who arrested, tried, convicted and imprisoned her are dead or scattered. Lefortovo prison still stands. Perm 35 was closed in 1988. The buildings gradually reclaimed by forest. But the principle that animated the machinery, the conviction that individual connection across ideological boundaries constituted existential threat, echoes beyond its historical moment. Larissa's story asks uncomfortable questions about the price of suspicion, the cost of systems that value control over human complexity, the tragedy of lives crushed by paranoia institutionalized as policy. She met a man near Pushkin Square. She drank coffee, walked in parks, discussed books and culture. For this, she was erased. The machinery operated exactly as designed.